Well, hey, my name is Grant, and I'm one of the teaching pastors here at 242, and I'm here with some VIPs. These are some very important people at 242. I'm here with Steve Larson, who is our acting interim lead pastor, and I'm here with Bob Smith, who his technical title is he is a church planting pastor at 242, but we just call him the OG because he has been around since the beginning. He's the original gangster. And so we are going to talk through very specifically what it looks like for 242 to be reopening and sort of all the decisions and factors that are going into that. And so I'm just going to ask these guys a couple of questions, and we're just glad that you're here with us because we want to invite you into our process as we make these decisions. So Steve, I'm going to start with you with just the $1,000,000 question. And the $1,000,000 question is, when do you think we're going to have live services again?
Yeah, well, that's really a good question, Grant, and thanks for asking the easiest question of all to start off today. But you are right. That's the $1,000,000 question. If I had a crystal ball, I'd be able to tell you exactly. But we don't, and we've been doing a lot of investigating, having a lot of conversations. We're really trying to line up our openings along with the state plan. So we're watching a lot of the statistics that come out and a lot of the analysis so that when cases and deaths are on a much greater decline and our health capacity is strong and testing is much more available, then we'll be able to move into what's called the government's stage 5. So when we are in stage 5, along with the state in stage 5, then we can probably start having some kind of meeting, some kind of gathering, and hard to say exactly, but maybe mid-July, mid-August, something like that. I know some people are hoping that it could be sooner. Some people would hope that it might even be a little later. They might think we're moving too quickly, but that seems to be the best place right now. And like we hear every week, things are subject to change, but we're hoping that definitely before the end of the summer, that would be a great stride.
All right, mid-July, I'll hold you to that. We can write that down.
I'm kind of like Sparky Anderson too. Back in the day when he was the manager for the Tigers, he said, "Take what I say and write it in gravel, not in concrete." So it may be flexible, but we'll do our best.
And that's kind of why we're doing this call right now, because when we originally went into quarantine, I was thinking, okay, yeah, we'll be out for a few months and then we'll all be back and there'll be like this definitive date, but it's way more complex than that. It's not like you just go back to life as it was in the past. And so, Bob, when we're in this, and for those of you out there, Bob is the head of our COVID task force. So he's the guy researching this. Bob's got background in public safety, law enforcement. Like he's the go-to guy here. Bob, when we are making these decisions, what factors are we considering? Like what unpack the complexity of this for us. You're muted. There we go.
Okay. I really think that sometimes the complexity can be a little bit understated. So the issues that we have facing us, obviously, in the state of Michigan is we're one of the hardest hit regions of the nation right now. And we want to be really pragmatic and safe about our return to public gatherings. We had just heard the other day that the governor is allowing gatherings of 10 or less. So we find that hopeful for many aspects of potentially small groups getting together in the next couple of weeks or watch parties and things like that. But these are incremental steps. I think that's part of the complexity here is that we need to take incremental steps. Steve alluded to it in his answering of the first question. Basically, the state is looking for a minimum of 14 days of declining COVID infections. Those are confirmed infections within each of the regions. Then they look at whether or not the hospitals can operate without crisis care plans in place. And it seems like the hospitals are doing really well right now. The number of COVID cases is continuing to decline. Their patient load is continuing to decline. But the third aspect of that everybody is looking at is potentially the tracing and therapy for anybody who might be infected. So these are the critical pieces that are being put in place right now. And for 242, we want to be great neighbors with our communities and with the county and with the state. So we've decided that cooperating in the program that they've laid out is really an important aspect. This is a public health issue, and we see this as a critical opportunity for the church to be part of the solution side and just moving forward. So several of the things that we're analyzing, we're looking at states that are already beginning to open up a little bit quicker than Michigan. We're talking to churches there. We're talking to them about their idea of contact-free or touch-free services. What do their children's programs look like going forward, and how do they provide some level of continuity? We're looking at sanitizing the building properly. We've cleaned really well throughout all our existence, but this is more about sanitizing and killing any potential germs that are, or COVID germs that are on any of our surfaces, and providing good social distancing practices that allow for people to feel a sense of gathering as an essential part of church. So we can't put everybody 20 feet apart and expect that feel exists. So we've been cooperating with the state. We've been in contact with the local officials here. We've also talked to a lot of the large churches in southeastern Michigan and sharing best practices there. We're also talking to churches in our individual areas and campuses in order to help them in many ways craft their plans as well. So we're learning and teaching as we go along, but it's important to understand that this is a complex issue, and a lot of people have feelings on either side of the equation. But we really want to err on the side of caring for the people in our community.
Yeah, that's really good. I know it's a complex issue, and there are strong opinions for sure. I believe Romans 13, the one thing that's consistent is we as Christians are called to be the best citizens that we can possibly be, and so that's sort of our ultimate calling. And so with that, Steve, what makes this unique for churches? Because I believe businesses are thinking about reopening and schools are thinking about reopening, but there's a unique instant for churches. What's unique for churches?
Well, churches have always been places that gather. We talk about gathering and scattering, and lately we've gotten the scattering part down pretty well. But if you go all the way back to Acts 2, when the early church was founded, they met together in the temple courts and from house to house. And there's some real power when there's a gathering of people. And we hear the word proclaimed, we share together in meals, the Lord's Supper, and there's just something really powerful and attractive to people as well. I think lately our technology has been a big win for us, that we've been able to, like my small group has been meeting regularly, and we've had great conversations, and we're helping one another in significant ways, but we're missing out on having the human touch. Just yesterday, I was on a call with about 15 or 20 people from our staff, and they were just talking about the fatigue that they're feeling by not having the human interaction. So when we're missing out on that human interaction, it's a big challenge for us. We go all the way back to Acts 2, and I think we want to move from the Zoom back to the room, and that's a big goal of ours. We'd like to see it happen as quickly as possible. Fortunately, we're still being effective as a church, even when we're scattered. And Grant, we've seen people make commitments to Christ and been baptized every single week since this crisis has taken place. We've seen our small group numbers increase along the way as well. People have continued being generous, much like they were in the early church. And so we're helping people take next steps with God right along, but we certainly miss being together and having that human touch. That's a difficulty. And I miss being with people, as the interim lead pastor just coming on board in the last month or so. I was really looking forward to connecting with the different campuses and trying to encourage you during this additional challenge that we have, and that really hasn't been able to take place yet, but I appreciate your patience, and we'll get there.
Yeah, Zoom Zoom back to the room. I like it. That's where we're headed. So, and then there's an added layer of complexity too, because we are a large church. So it's not like we have several small gatherings. We have large gatherings, and those are kind of at the highest risk. So we're constantly evaluating and considering that. Bob,
well, I saw
when we
something too, Grant.
yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I read that there are like 400,000 churches across America of all shapes and sizes, and there are only 50 churches the size of 242 across the country. So it's really a unique challenge that we're trying to navigate.
Yeah, absolutely. And so with that said, Bob, when we get back together, like what's it going to look like? Are we going to requiring masks? Are we going to have kids areas? Like what will a church service look like when we get back together?
Well, I think you can expect to have 242 present the gospel in a really relevant, meaningful way, as we always have. Worship that just engages. So I wouldn't expect that you would find the worship services being significantly different by any sense of the imagination, just continuing to get better and better as new leaders and new people come alongside with us. I would say that you would expect probably to see the auditorium set up to be more in a social distancing platform, depending really on where we are with the state and what the state is saying. Right now, we've made calculations of new occupancy rates based on 36 square feet of distance that each person would need to take up, or 16 square feet, or just a minimum of 7 square feet, which is kind of a normal occupancy. And we're beginning to calculate what are each of those rooms, what can they now hold for services, and structuring it that way. So you probably see people being a little farther apart, little touch-free services where we wouldn't be passing generosity buckets or passing communion. Those would be in stations where you'd pick stuff up on your way in and then make your offering on the way out, something like that. Children's programming is really an interesting thing. You just can't ask 2-year-olds to social distance very well. So we're going to be thinking through and really watching what the public schools are doing in regard to this and kind of taking our cues from them and some other churches of similar size that we are. And one of the things that's really interesting, while we are one of 50 of the largest churches in the nation, we have campuses that go from 200 to 4,000. So this idea of scaling how we come back into church will really play a part, as it seems that the governor will be using the regions that have been designed to determine when things will drop down a little bit more.
That's good. So when we come back, do you know how we're going to be like? Are we going to be like doing tickets? Like, how do we limit? We're going to have a standing line. First 50 people get in the door. Like, what does that look like?
You know what? We're really watching other churches to do that. I mean, one of the really important things is that we want to make sure that people are included, and we're not just a bunch of insiders gathering. So people who show up, we want to welcome them into our midst. So we need to take that into consideration, as we've garnered far more people, online than we've ever experienced in person. So it's just going to be hopefully we're going to watch and learn to see what are the best practices going forward. We have systems where we've used ticketing or RSVPs before, and we can have seating, and we can have ushers ushering people to different areas. Those are all fairly easy things for us to implement. But we want to respond respectfully to the state's considerations, but also to the conditions that we have in place.
That's good. So in essence, there's a lot of factors that we don't know, and just like we went into quarantine, not knowing a lot of things, we're going to be coming out of quarantine sort of week by week. We evaluate this daily. Steve, I would just ask you if during this time where there's so many unknowns, could you just kind of tell us as Christians, as followers of Christ, like how can we win in this next couple of months?
Yeah, that's a good question, Grant. The church so often has shot its wounded, or we've divided over crazy things. Sometimes we divided whether we should have hymnals or not. or whether we should have one cup for communion. And the community at large looks at the church sometimes and says, well, can't you all get along? And I think it's really essential for us to get along, even if our own opinion is not adhered to. And I think the other thing we can do while we are still waiting to gather, if you take that word "win," maybe you could keep watering the soil. I mean, you can keep having conversations with people that you work with, or you neighbor by, or come into contact, and you may not see fruit from that right away. But if you just keep loving on them over time, they'll see you'll have an impact on them. Probably on if you take win as an acrostic, that's what pastors do, right? The I part might be investing or inviting other people, maybe to your small group, or when it is time to gather again. They see your humility and your Christ-like character. That speaks loudly. And just keep being a neighbor on the end part. Is we've seen neighbors be neighborly, donating blood. Bob, you and Kim did the thing in your neighborhood where you gathered food, and people were very generous in helping the less fortunate. So if we keep doing those kinds of things, it shouts about the Christ's love to people. And just the other part is, I think there's probably a time of anxiety that people are having. So if that's where you are, I would say just like 1 Peter 5:7, cast all your cares on God because he cares for you. And in a time of anxiety, submit your petitions to him, it says in Scripture in Philippians 4, and the peace of God will come. So that's another way the church can win. We can be praying for people to come in contact with, and those who are suffering with anxiety. Just really being Jesus wherever you can. And if we each do that, you think about 242 with about 10,000 people. If we each do that, can you imagine the numbers of people that we're impacting, even when we're not gathering? So when the time comes to gather, we'll probably see an influx of people coming down the road if we continue loving people like Jesus did.
That's good. So really, as we move forward, like there's a lot of unknowns, I think, as we've said, but I think what's something we've said from the beginning is the light shines brightest in the darkness, and we think the gospel shines brightest in these uncertain times. And so we're just encouraging everybody out there to be that love, and not to put your trust in the government, not to put your trust in even us as leaders, but to put your trust in God, because he knows absolutely when we're returning to church. And so I just want to thank you guys for being with us and talking candidly. There's going to be more information that we roll out that has specific plans to it. To stay up to date, you can go to our website, 242community.com, and just right on the home page, there's a big red button that says the reopening plan, and you can follow along. We update that on a regular basis so that you'll know exactly what phase we're in and what's happening next. So again, Steve, Bob, thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Grant. Appreciate it.